with what we plant. And the benefits to native plants aren't just for you and me, but for the natural world around us. Native plants are the bottom of the food chain. And these feed insects such as bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, moths, hummingbird isn't an insect, but beetles. And then these in turn feed our songbirds, our small mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. So when you are out this spring walking, hopefully some of you will get out in the woods and you'll come upon our native plants. And I want you to take a look at who is using the native plants, the little flies and bees and beetles. It's really interesting. So imagine, if you will, what this area looked like before European settlers came. Wild plant and animal, providing wild plant and animal communities interacting. The animals pollinated the plants and they moved seeds around, and the plants in turn supported the animals. And of course, there were Native Americans, and they influenced planting in different areas, and everything worked together. And that's what we need to do, is realize that we're part of the natural community and we can help things work together. Planting the plants that matter to bees, butterflies, birds, other animals, and ourselves. I don't know if there's a pointer here, but in the upper left-hand corner, that's a monarch caterpillar and swamp milkweed. Below it is the swamp milkweed flower with a bumblebee. And then in the upper right-hand corner is a bloodroot with a bee fly on it. And below that is woodland phlox. So why do we plant? What are we hoping to achieve? Why are we gardeners? What do we hope to accomplish? What joys can be derived from planting? Creating happiness through beauty. If you're a landscaper, you might want to make sure that your clients are happy. A lot of people want their neighbors to be impressed by what they plant. So what benefits are we overlooking? How can we make a lasting difference that will ensure our grandchildren will be able to enjoy nature to the feeling at fullest? That all plants and animals that we take for granted are here for future generations. And what we plant can really make a difference. So what we're doing is we're restoring a food web, helping support many species of wildlife. And these plants are self-sustaining and support wildlife diversity and can really work for you. So I want to point out that when people feel connected to the environment, when they realize all the benefits of having native plants, such as food, because we need pollinators for food, that they feel more connected to it and feel more interested in caring for it. So when you're out, even in just your own gardens, take a look at who's using the native plants, and you realize how things interact together. That if we want more songbirds, we need more insects. A lot of people are interested in being locavores, eating local foods, having their own gardens. Well, one thing you might want to do if you're a gardener for food, or if you're in a community garden, is to plant native plants, because these make sure that we have the native pollinators that you need to get your pollination done. These are unhappy plants. Plants that were either not cared for or put in the wrong position. And I'm sure you've all seen these walking outside restaurants or in somebody else's garden. And you know what happened? Somebody went to a plant sale and they had to have that plant, and they brought it home and put it in the wrong spot. So what I want you to think about is making a list, and then before you go to the plant sales or to a nursery, you pick out the plants on that list. Do your research ahead of time so you don't have unhappy plants. So research shows that people have preferences are mainly determined by the desire to fit into their neighborhood. You know, if you want that nice green lawn, everybody wants a nice green lawn. You don't want to stick out. So, and native plants get a bad rap. People think that they're messy. And people don't want messy, hard to manage plants. But native plants are like any other plant. You fit them into your garden, you put the right spot in the right place, not like my daddy. Don't put oxeye sunflower by your driveway, because it's going to fall over in the driveway and you're going to start hitting it with your car door. You want to make sure you put everything in the right area. And then once established, you have established a native garden, be prepared to educate others about it. Tell them what you're doing, tell how important it is. Tell them you want to make sure that your neighbors live in a healthy environment where we're not using a lot of pesticides and washing off chemicals down into the waterways. I want that beneficial plants. I'm planting these for you so that you can live in a safe environment with beneficial plants, animals, insects, and birds. I'm doing this to keep us healthy. So the pictures are of Culliver's root and Maylena garden with some Monarda. And the other one is a woodland garden at the nursery that has Phlox divaricata, golden groundsel, starry Solomon seal, and of course May apple. So there's a simple way to choose the proper plants for your site and put them together in a planting. You want to match the plants to the site and layer them. So in order to have success with our garden and landscape plantings, we need to match the plants to the soil, light, and area we have. There are great plants for every situation. You go out in the wild, you don't see a lot of areas that don't have any plants at all. And except for if you've got a huge deer population, it's another whole talk. So if you match the plants for the area you have, you'll have success. Like I said, there's great plants for every situation, and with creative placement, we can have astounding gardens that are not only beautiful in their own right, but provide habitat. We can design plant communities in our gardens using the altered area we have, no matter how altered it is. I know that some people, after their houses are built, they get a lot of backfill there. There isn't a lot that will grow there, but with a little bit of improvement, you can even have decent gardens there. So what we want to do is use native plants that are pleasing to us and pleasing the animals that use plants. This garden is mainly summer phlox, cardinal flower, black-eyed Susan, and Chelone, white turtlehead, and lobelia. So I talked about layers before, and if you've ever read Planting in a Post-Wild World, you know about the layers. Well, I guess I didn't do this one. So you want to look at how plants fit into nature. So I always recommend that you go out to natural native areas and look about how the plants are interacting with each other. Look at the canopy trees, if you're doing a woodland garden, and the shrubs and the herbaceous layer together. If you're doing a meadow, go out and look at how the plants are interacting together. So when people come out the nursery, sometimes they come out the nursery, they haven't done any homework at all. So we start from the beginning, and that's what I want you to think about. Start from the beginning. So I've got a new bed. How do I know what to plant in it? Well, I always tell people, I show them the palette of plants that will fit in the area they described. And I say, look for 3 plants that you absolutely have to have. And these are plants that you really like, your grandmother had, and they have to be long-lived plants. Well, that's going to be structure plants. And I say, pick 3 plants from the structure area. And then fill in with things that bloom along the way. So seasonal. Some things have big flowers, but they come and go. Those are your seasonal plants. And then the fillers, things that don't always stick around, like red cardinal flower, wild columbine, things that aren't long-lived. And they kind of move around the garden, but they keep the garden full and they feed a lot of animals. And then the ground covers, which I'm going to say I think is one of the most important parts, because these not only keep the soil moisture in, they also keep weeds down. They help build up soil texture, soil organic matter, and they also flower usually earlier when a lot of other things aren't. So again, choosing the right material for picking native plants. We need to look at the area we wish to plant. We're going to choose the palette of plants that survive under similar conditions, similar stresses. The plants that grow together in the wild are similar situations. And by doing this, we can match the plants to the site. So you're going to look at the light and look at it different times during the day. You might think you have a full sun area, but at different times during the day, it might be shady. Look at the soil moisture. Do I have an area that's wet in the spring, so I couldn't even mow it? Well, that's a good opportunity. It may be dry in the summer, but there are plants that will go from wet to dry. And then you may have it really wet again in the fall, or you may have a really dry area or a great area that has a lot of dust and is really nice to plant. So you just got to look at all of those situations. And soil fertility, a lot of organic matter, or it's pretty used up. The exposure along the lake shore, you're going to need plants with strong stems. Microplants are always nice because sometimes you can sneak in things that you couldn't sneak in before. And I think color is important. So to me, it's not. I just want something always in bloom. But there are people who come out to the nursery and they only want white flowers because they're doing a moon garden. Or they only want red, white, and blue flowers. And you should please yourself as well.
Feedback from the Zoom audience that you should either stand closer or speak louder or both.
I was yelling.
I know. I'm sorry, but I don't understand because they could hear me, but it's not any different from where I am.
Okay, I'll try. So in the wild, you really see bare soil. So covering the soil with plants makes it harder for the weeds to invade. It also helps retain moisture and improve soil texture over time. When planting in layers, we can accomplish this and make the gardens pleasing to people. And people should feel connected to the landscape. And to accomplish this, I want you to provide structure, fillers, texture, and dynamic fillers and time. Time's important. You can plant the garden this spring, but it's not going to be the same garden in the fall, and certainly not the next year. The plants root in, they grow bigger. So one of the things you want to make sure is you know what the size is and what their ultimate size is going to be. So you're going to choose up, like I said, plants that thrive, add the layers, cover the soil, plant densely. If you're trying to keep the cost down and you're not planting densely, you want to make sure that you put a little bit of mulch in between. I don't recommend huge piles of mulch, just little bits. That way still the seeds can hit the ground. So planting your garden is relatively easy if you follow the steps like I've said. You first need to look at the area you have and then make a list of plants that will grow there and go from there. So let's walk through this a little bit. So the 3 plants you have to have are ones that should be long-lived. And things like wild geranium, which is a really nice plant. You can use your favorite plant or plants that are host plants. Just choose 3 and work from there. So let's say that these are the 3 I chose. Well, one of them is a dynamic filler, the wild columbine, because it produces a lot of seed, but isn't always around. It's kind of a short-lived plant. But it'll still work as the base for our garden. We're going to repeat these through the area. Then you want to add pizzazz and the rest of the year. So here I've added goat's beard, zigzag goldenrod, blue wood aster, and white wood aster. And then, of course, the ground covers. I'm adding the ground cover. Remember, we're going to prevent the weeds, control soil erosion, keep the ground cooler. It's also great underneath trees where the pupa stages of many butterflies and moths drop to the ground. And this helps protect them. When you go out there and you rake everything up, you're raking up your butterflies. Also, queen bumblebees and bumblebees need places to hide in the winter. Also, things like mourning cloaks over winter as butterflies in that dust. So you don't want to break everything off. So having the ground cover under trees like that really helps those animals. This is 2-leaf toothwort in the upper left-hand corner. Underneath it is Labrador violet. Upper right is barren strawberry, and the bottom right is mayapple. So plants with something's always in bloom. Here we have Virginia anemone and the zigzag goldenrod again. And prepare the ground. And a lot of people come out to me and say, I'm going to till up this ground and then I'm going to plant. Well, you can do that. But remember, when you till the ground, you're releasing a lot of weed seeds. And so I think this is a better way and it works. And I've done it myself several times and I've seen other people do it. You put down cardboard or newspaper, put about 3 inches of mulch or compost on it. You wait 2 to 3 months, you can plant right through it. If you've got something like mugwort or snow on the mountain, you might want to wait a little longer. because they're really tough. So now I want to go through each type of garden. I don't know. Everybody picked up the plant list, but there was a plant list. So as we go through each individual type of garden, there are certain conditions that favor certain plants. And although many of these plants will grow in one type of garden, there are certain ones that really like the woodland area. So they have to have some shade, they have to have a little bit of organic matter. And these are important ones for our pollinator populations, because in the spring, these plants are making use of the early spring sunlight when there's no leaves on the trees. So that's when they take the opportunity to grow, flower, and then a lot of them are dormant by June. So this is my dry shade garden, and that's how I know what things grow in the shade. I live in an oak forest. So here is mayapple, whitewood aster, uvularia, goat's beard. There's a lot of plants in there. This would be in May. There's a few things in flower here, but you can't really see it. This is my dry shade list. That's what you should always do, is make a list of all the plants that will grow in the area that you want to plant and when they'll bloom. And that helps you narrow things down. That's when it's blooming. That one happens to be wild columbine. Okay. So laying out the garden again, you're going to want to do your essential layers. The structural layer, the one that are going to be there all the time. And here we have Appalachian sedge, wild geranium, and early meadow rue. And the seasonal layer, bloodroot, bluewood aster, and red doll's eyes. These are the ones that flower at different times when your structural layer aren't flowering. The ground cover layer, here's Canada Mayflower, Mayapple, and green and gold. And the fillers, the ones that aren't always there but make a really big impact. There's a cutleaf toothwort, wild columbine, and jewelweed. Now, I'm going to say something about jewelweed. A lot of people like it, and the hummingbirds love it, and little kids like it because they can flick the seeds. But if you have one in your garden, you're going to have a lot in your garden. So if you're trying to have a very neat garden, jewelweed is not for you, but it is a really nice native plant. And hummingbirds just don't stay away from it. So we're going to tie the garden together by putting all these components together. We have the essential layer, which will be the wild geranium. We have the seasonal layer, which would be the blue stem goldenrod. We have our ground cover, the barren strawberry, and then our filler, the trout lily, which comes and goes. But again, it's a really stunning plant when it's in bloom in the early spring. And so let's talk a little bit about these dry shade plants. Here we again have wild columbine, white doll's eyes, and blue wood aster. So wild columbine is, I'm going to say one of my favorite plants, but I say that about all of them. So wild columbine isn't really long-lived, but it makes a lot of little black seeds, and the seeds are generally ripe around July 4th. The plant starts flowering mid to late May, and it is really a great hummingbird plant. They just love it. You see a lot of butterflies around it, and it will move around your garden, filling in any holes. If something dies, it's got an opportunity to drop the seed there, and it will grow. It's just a stunning plant. Our hummingbirds have long beaks, and the spurs on our native columbines also are long. And wild geranium, it's a very long-lived perennial. If somebody's just starting out and they're afraid to start with a woodland garden, I always tell them wild geranium will grow. And you know the good thing about wild geranium? A lot of these hybrid geraniums that they're selling now in gardens, they flop in the summer and they take over half your garden. Our wild geranium doesn't flop. It flowers for about 2-3 weeks, sometimes a little longer. The leaves stay really clean and neat all summer, and just a really workhorse. And I did just learn this week that there also was a little minor bee that only uses wild geranium. just kind of cool that you're providing a food source for that bee. White doll's eye, which flowers in mid-May to about the end of May, depending upon the year. Who knows what this year will bring. Big white fluffy flowers. It doesn't provide any nectar, but it does provide pollen, and you see quite often beetles and flies on it. And then in the fall, starting in August, you'll start getting green berries, and then it turns this bright red color into October, and it's just really stunning in the garden. It is poisonous. All parts of this plant are poisonous, so you don't want to make sure that there's any dogs or kids that will eat plants. Most of them know better, but. And Profolate bellwort, this grows in the dry shade too. I was shocked when I was first learning about plants when I saw this growing in our dry woodland. It's a beautiful plant, really a stunner. It has light yellow flowers. They kind of hang like they're drooping. They flower at the same time about as red trillium, and it produces quite a bushy plant in the summer. It stays up all summer. It's a very neat plant. Folts Solomon seal has these nice arching stems, beautiful white flowers in the spring, and you see a lot of insects on them as well. And then throughout the summer, you'll start getting the seed heads, and they have little red dots on them, and then they eventually turn all red. And there are birds that do eat the berries. And I had somebody comment to me earlier this week that deer don't like them. Well, they're a member of the lily family, and so they don't usually eat them, but I have seen them eat them. Early meadow rue. Now this could be one of your structural plants. It stays all summer. Flowers aren't stunning. The females are gray, and the males are yellow with pollen on the inside, but they move like quaking aspens. So if you put like a river of it through your garden or one here and there, they stay up all summer in a woodland garden, and the leaves move, so it gives you some texture. Virginia anemone. Now the deer don't like this one because it's got calcium oxalate crystals in it. All the anemones do. They have these pure white flowers in July when not a lot of woodland plants are in flower. It gets up about 1.5, 2 feet tall, sometimes a little taller. In fact, I think we had some 3 foot this year at the nursery. Black cohosh used to be called Simiciphuga. I've started taking that off a lot now, off a lot of my list. It's also called fairy candles, bug bane. They get about 3 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, and then send up these spikes of pure white candles again in July. And they'll grow in the dry shade. Actually, they'll grow in moist shade too. And I put them in my mother's garden 3 years ago in kind of a sunny location. They're doing fine there too. They just stay shorter. So these are apples. And if you smell these apples, they smell really good. These are May apples. Maple comes out of the ground and it's brown. You can see the bud in the left-hand top picture, and then they open to these pure white flowers in May. They're about 2 inches in diameter, and then they have these nice umbrella-shaped leaves throughout the summer, and they start developing their apples in August. All parts of this plant are poisonous as well till we get to this stage, and when you can smell as you walk by these nice smelling apples, you can eat them, but there really isn't much to them. But it's a very nice ground cover for a dry area. They will grow in wet areas as well. I have them in some really, really moist areas, but I also have them in our dry shade woods. Christmas fern is an excellent plant for dry shade. This will grow in moist shade as well. It gets bigger in moist shade, tends to have more fronds, but it will grow in dry shade. Evergreen. So if I went out and uncovered, and you don't have much snow here, but we do at our house, and if I went out and uncovered it, I'd see the Christmas fern is still all green. Blue wood aster. The blue wood aster doesn't spread like white wood aster, but the main advantage of blue wood aster is it flowers very late, October into November sometimes, late September, October, sometimes into November. It has heart-shaped leaves, and you can leave the seed heads up for the birds in the fall, and it's a host plant for the pearl crescent butterfly. So it's a really nice plant for the woodland garden. Blue stem goldenrod, and a lot of people probably not you, because you probably all know that the goldenrods don't produce pollen that floats in the air, so they're not the one giving you allergies. Goldenrods are beautiful plants. This one in particular, blue stem, or some people call it wreath goldenrod, looks great with red cardinal flower. It looked really good with all the asters. It's very fibrous rooted, so it holds soil in place really well. And it doesn't spread on and on and on and on forever like Canada goldenrod. And it works in a woodland setting. And violets, if you want fritillary butterflies, you need violets. A lot of people don't want the violets that spread on and on. These two are some native violets that don't do that. This is downy yellow violet, which spreads mainly by seed, and birds do come and eat the seeds right out of their seed heads look like little 3 triangled fingers, and the seeds sit in there, and birds will come and eat the seeds out of them. And the other one is Labrador violet with the purple flowers. That one spreads mainly by seeds, but the stems will root into the ground. But they're really easy to pull out if you decide you don't like them, but why would you decide that? So now let's talk about moist shade. And there's most of those other plants that I showed you will grow in a moist shade, but these ones are kind of picky. They don't want a real dry soil. So with a lot of organic matter, not wet by any stretch of imagination, but so that with a lot of organic matter, so it'll hold some moisture. And this is Jeffersonia or twin leaf, foam flower, and phlox, woodland phlox. So here's the garden at the nursery, and this one has the foam flower, golden groundsel, and in the background is the woodland phlox. And here's the twin leaf. So it's named after Thomas Jefferson, who was a great naturalist. Looks like it has 2 leaves, but it's actually only 1 leaf. The pure white flowers are just beautiful. But most years they only last about 3 days, and then they're done. The rain hits them and they shatter. You can see in the picture on the left-hand side, you can see a seed head starting to form. They look like little pots. And as the top pops open and the stem desiccates, it drops the seeds. Well, a lot of our woodland plants have seeds with eliosomes on them. Eliosomes are fleshy appendages on the seeds, like not hepatica, Dutchman's breeches and wild ginger, trilliums. They all have eliosomes on them. And the ants will come and take the seed and take it back to their nest, eat the eliosomes, and pitch the seed. So that's how they get planted. They're ant dispersed. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, nice. And then we have what it looks like in the summer. So it stays up all summer. It's not one that's going to go dormant. And this is a ground cover. Foam flower spreads right against the ground. It's very lovely in May, especially if you hadn't seen plants in a long time, after the snow. And it has these white foamy flowers, almost covered with insects, turn maroon in the fall. And it looks really lovely. Oh, the next one. Looks really lovely with other ground covers. So this is wild ginger. Has heart-shaped leaves, spreads right against the ground. Has these brown flowers that are hiding underneath the leaves. And above the brown flower, you do see a tiarella leaf. And that's what I was going to say, is that I recommend not planting just one ground cover. Plant a bunch of them so they kind of intermingle together. And that way you're creating more of a habitat, you're getting more flowering time. And if you lose one, you don't lose your whole ground cover. It kind of makes them more of a community. And this is the one that looks really good with tiarella, the woodland phlox. This is Phlox divaricata. If you've got vinca and you've been pulling it out for years, which I do all the time, this is a great answer to that. If somebody says, oh, I like vinca so much. Well, this is evergreen, like vinca. You'll see hummingbird moths on it, or any of the clear wing moths. You see quite frequently in the spring, you'll see them on these. They go to lobelia and monarda later on, but they use the phlox in the spring. It's really a nice sight. And then these are berries. And I usually ask people what berries they are, and you probably all know. They're Jack in the Pulpit berries. And Jack in the Pulpit can be either Jack or Jill. So if I were a newly emerged seedling, I would probably be Jack. I wouldn't be big enough to flower anyway. Or if I were a plant in the woods and I had a lot of invasives over me and it's been a really dry year, I'd probably go back to being Jack to conserve my energy. If I get enough light and enough moisture and no deers kick me over or anything, I'm probably going to be Jill. So when your Jack in the Pulpit comes out of the ground and it flowers and then it just curls up and is gone after it's done flowering, that's probably Jack. Jill will start forming green berries and then they'll eventually turn bright red. Now again, this is one the deer don't like because it has calcium oxalate crystals in it, which is really nice, and it's a really unusual plant. And people get so excited when they see Jack in the Pulpit. I get excited too. Red doll's eyes, again, this one is quite similar to the white doll's eyes, but it doesn't get as tall. The berries are red. The berries flower in August instead of waiting till September, October. And those are really beautiful berries in July in the woodland garden. They're just stunning. Again, this one's poisonous as well. And Canada waterleaf, which is a really nice ground cover in a moist setting. It spreads quite quickly. It has these nice frilly flowers. They flower in June, which is kind of cool. And I've seen them holding back some invasives like vinca and daylily at Robert Treeman. So they kind of can hold their own. I won't say they'll get rid of those, but they'll hold them back, which is nice. Zigzag goldenrod likes the moist shade. You can see here, actually on the left, you can see the ending of Folts Solomon's Seal as it's dying back. You can see some of the berries. And so they kind of grow together. And they flower usually in August, starting into September. And again, the goldenrods provide a lot of good protein in their pollen for different insects. And maidenhair fern. A lot of people think maidenhair fern is fragile. It's really not. It's a really hardy, nice fern once it's established, but it does need some soil moisture. A lot of times you see it on banks, with water kind of, where water is kind of held in. And I've seen it on rock walls, on some of the streams leading to the Finger Lakes. You see it sometimes, but it's a really nice, stunning plant. So those are woodland gardens. So let's go on and talk about wetland gardens. And it can be, like I said before, they can be on the side of a lake. They can be on the side of a pond. It can be a man-made pond. It can be your ditch in front of your house where the water sits and you don't want to, some people mow that or try and spray it, which is really not good. It's better if you let the plants stay there. Because once you take the plants out of the ditches, soil runs down. If you spray it, the pesticides are going to run down to the lakes there. So you really want to keep that planted. So here's my fake garden. This is a pond. You can see this will be in June. So the blue flag and the green and gold are still in flower. So again, for the wet garden, you're going to want a structural layer, the ones that are going to hang out. And I have Joe Pyeweed here, royal fern, and tall meadow rue. In the seasonal layer, we have our lilium, Turk's cap lily, the marsh marigold, and the Amsonia. In the ground cover layer, we have Woodwardia, netted chain fern, palm sedge, and the golden groundsel. And then the plants that are going to come and go, we've got red lobelia and jewelweed. So putting them all together, and generally what I tell people is to pick the 3, make sure something's always in bloom, but you don't want to just put one of each. So you want to either group them together, because remember, butterflies, like monarchs, need about 4 square feet of a plant to see it. They don't all have to be right together, but they've got to be close enough so that they can see them. So generally what I tell people is to mass some of them and repeat some of them. And of course, the ground covers you're going to want to plant around them. Okay, and then we've got the golden groundsel and the red lobelia and Canada lily. And here we have pink turtlehead, royal fern, and the cardinal flower. Okay, so royal fern, one of my favorite ferns because it doesn't need the wet. I have it in a spot with ordinary garden soil, but it will really grow in really, really wet areas. So it comes out of the ground, it's kind of a brownish yellow, turns a bright green, and then that's actually after a frost. The very pretty plant. Gets up about 3 feet tall, has a nice fibrous root system that's going to hold your soil in place. If it's really wet, well, even if it's not really wet, it'll build its own little hummock. So it kind of gets up above the ground a little bit. White turtlehead, Kiloni, this one blooms in late July and August, sometimes a little later. It's a host plant for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly. And hummingbirds and butterflies all love this plant. You see them frequently on this plant. Behind it, you see the leaves of blue flag iris. So the blue flag did its thing in June, and then this is later on in the season. And our lilies, Canada lily and Turk's cap lily. Unfortunately, both of them are eaten by the lily leaf beetle and by deer. But if you've got a spot someplace that you can protect them, or where you're not too near people that are growing ornamental lilies, they're really stunning. So the Canada lily blooms in July, and the Turk's cap lily blooms in June. Turk's cap can get about 5 to 8 feet tall. The Canada is about 3 feet tall, but the hummingbirds really love them. And of course, red cardinal flower, this one's not particularly long-lived, but makes a ton of seed. And as long as you make sure that the seed hits the ground and it gets light, you'll always have red cardinal flower in your garden. So you want to, when the seed heads are ripe, you want to sprinkle them around where you want. Make sure that they hit the contact with the soil, and then you'll have the plants coming. So wet sun. Of course, this is swamp milkweed, and swamp milkweed doesn't necessarily need full sun, but it will work there. And Amsonia and golden groundsel. And this is one of my favorite plants, but aren't they all? Joe pie weed, it attracts beneficial insects, which are really good if you have a vegetable garden, because you don't want to be out there spraying pesticides. You want the beneficial insects to come to you and take care of the aphids and that type of thing. So Joe pie weed flowers usually in late August into September, depending upon where you put it, how tall it will get. So if it's in a really moist soil and full sun, it's going to get every bit of 8 feet tall. If it's in a little bit of shade and a drier soil, it's going to stay a little bit shorter. And you can always whack it in half in June and keep it shorter anyway. I've used it in 2 weddings. It makes a really nice cut flower. Blue flag iris has a really nice root system too, helps hold the soil in place, but this one does need it wet. It's got to be in quite moist soil or actually in a pond. Flowers in June. Hummingbirds and butterflies love it. Of course, the ducks will eat your seeds just when you're getting ready to harvest them. So if you want to grow them from seed, you've got to outsmart them. And swamp milkweed, of course, this is a host plant for the monarch butterfly, but it does provide a food for a lot of different insects as well, both pollen and nectar. It's a very attractive plant. Usually gets up between 3 and 4 feet tall. Quite bushy if you let it be. This year, there were so many monarch caterpillars on our crop. I was wondering if we were going to have a crop, but that's really good to see a lot of monarch caterpillars. The wing stems, some people call this yellow ironweed. Gets up about 8 feet tall if it's moist and in full stem, but at our nursery and our soil there and with the shade, it stays about 3 feet. Bright yellow in August. And then has these really cool seed pods. I just love the way the seeds are kind of like together. The little discs all fit together. I don't know. I love to just get out and look at things. Golden groundsel. This is the one I was talking about. If you've got a ditch, this is an excellent plant. It's evergreen. Flowers flower in June. You don't have to worry about deadheading them because they turn to like straw and just kind of fall over. They're a beautiful plant. The flowers are the leaves are very attractive. They're in heart-shaped. We also have spoon leaf groundsel, which does the same thing. It doesn't seem to spread as fast, and it stays quite a bit shorter. Where these will get up about 1 foot tall with the flowers on, 6 to 8 inches with the leaves, and the spoon leaf groundsel gets up about 5, 6 inches tall, and then the flowers are about 6 inches over them. And prairie gardens, if I said to you wildflower garden, that's probably what you don't think of. So the prairie or meadow garden, so if you've got full sun, these are the plants for you. They provide a lot of pollen and nectar, a lot of color. They can help you break up paths or designate paths. They can help hide areas. These are ones for your drier soil. So here's a mixed border garden I made with Monarda, purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan. There's a palm sedge in there and green coneflower. So butterfly weed, and when somebody tells me they have terrible soil, full sun, I say, I have the plant for you. Butterfly weed is really stunning when it's in bloom. Usually it starts in July. Gets up about 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall and is wide. If you try and baby it, it's not going to like it. It doesn't like a lot of water. It has a long tap root, and if it a lot of water sets on it, it tends to rot. So, but this plant really, really loves full sun, and it doesn't need a lot of organic matter. And again, it provides a lot of pollen and nectar for different insects. It's truly a stunning plant. And common milkweed, and I want to tell you, don't plant this unless you've got a large area because it goes on and on and on forever. Where swamp milkweed has a fibrous root system and butterfly weed has a long taproot, this one has long ropey roots that will keep going. But if you have an area where you can plant it, like my sister does in between 2 sidewalks, or you have a large area to cover, this plant smells really, really good. It smells really spicy. It is a host plant for the monarchs, and a lot of other insects use it. And the plant, the picture on the bottom isn't a milkweed. It is Jenna Fox. I don't know how it got in there. I guess somebody wanted to put the butterfly in there, but there it is. Anise hyssop, bumblebees absolutely love it. So if you've got a youngster and you want to show them how docile the bees are, if they're afraid of bees, take them out to a setting of anise hyssop, and you can actually pet the little bees. They move their little back legs, but bees are really docile unless you threaten them. So anise hyssop smells like anise, smells like licorice when you crush it. It's not a long-lived plant, but again, it produces a lot of seeds, so it can move around your garden. Excellent for pollen and nectar. This is in a garden with oxeye sunflower and red monarda. And the mountain mints, again, some of my favorite. If you come out to the nursery and you show any interest in the mountain mints, I'll have you smell them all. And it's funny because different people like the smell of different mountain mints. This is Virginia mountain mint. It has the white flowers with the little purple spots on them. The mountain mints don't spread like other mints. They pretty much stay 1.5 to 3 feet wide, depending upon which one it is. And they get up about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. New England aster, and again, the asters and the goldenrods are so important for the monarchs and the bumblebees in the fall when they're trying to fatten up for winter. They produce a lot of pollen, a lot of nectar, and they're just beautiful together. There's nothing like fall with the goldenrods and the asters. You can leave the seed heads up for the birds in the fall, and it's a host plant for the pearl crescent butterfly. And the goldenrods. We do have Canada goldenrod in the ground at the nursery, and you can see what it's done. It goes on and on and on forever. And it provides pollen and nectar, but these are 2 well-behaved goldenrods. I think we have 6 different goldenrods that we grow, but this is showy goldenrod on the left, and stiff goldenrod on the right. They both have nice stems. They're great cut flowers, and they provide a lot of pollen and nectar. There's a little beetle on the showy goldenrod. Tall boneset, another one of my favorites, flowers really late. I like ones that flower late and kind of help us to have color late into the fall. Usually late September into October. Beautiful white flowers, and as you can see, these butterflies, we're loving it. Gets very bushy, gets about 3.5, 4 feet tall, and it's just a really pretty plant. And of course, if you have a meadow, you really need to put grasses in it, because grasses are what keeps the flowers upright in a meadow. depending upon where they're planted, especially if the soil's very rich. So these help support the flowers. They also provide seeds for birds. They're host plants for different small skippers usually. They have these nice open seed heads. Well, this one does switchgrass. And the little blue stem has a nice blue color to it. And then in the fall, it turns copper. And so I always tell people, don't cut back these grasses because the birds use these grasses to help make nests too. They provide a lot of cover as well. Prairie smoke, if you've ever been to Mulberry, thank you. You've seen prairie smoke in the early spring. Usually in June, they have these nice pink flowers and then the puffy seed beds in the fall, seed heads in the fall. They're not, they can actually take quite a bit of water and they're not fast growing, but they do make a nice ground cover. And pussy toes, so the American painted lady, the little caterpillars come out to the nursery every year and they eat our pussy toes, but we don't care. They spread not quite quickly, but they spread about medium spread, make a really nice ground cover. The flowers are like pearly everlasting. If you cut them, they make nice cuts. They're short though, but it's a really good workhorse for a sunny garden. You can plant this around your butterfly weed and there you go, you've got quite a rich habitat right there. This is a garden I made on a berm. It's got monkey flower and anise hyssop, monarda, Joe Pye weed, palm sedge, obedient plant, purple cornflower. So they're all kind of grouped together, but they all work together. So again, you want the layers. You're gonna have plants that are gonna be there all the time, such as this Indian grass, the stiff goldenrod, and New England aster. And the seasonal layers, such as monarda, which is a ground cover in the spring, the black-eyed Susan, and the butterfly weed. And then the ground covers, like barren strawberry, blue-eyed grass, and prairie smoke. And then the dynamic layer, which is our native black-eyed Susans, which is a long-lived plant. The agastantia, which is a long-lived plant, and the other one is partridge pea. Tying them all together, making sure you have some of each, so you have a complete garden with something always in bloom and with the ground cover. And this is common milkweed, the anise hyssop, the combination there, and the butterfly weed. So this is my woodland garden through the seasons. I don't quite have every season here, but the first one would be in April into May. So the Mayapple are just starting to come up. And this is the same garden later on with the summer phlox, the black-eyed Susan, and in the upper right, you can see in the forefront, the aster just starting, and then the bottom one would be the whitewood aster later on in the fall. Here's the garden from a different point, and this is actually a dry woodland garden. You can see the summer phlox, black-eyed Susan, and the foreground is early meadow rue, and there's goat's beard, and there's a German short hair there too. This is that same garden from a different point of view in May. Unfortunately, you can't see a lot of the flowers, but well, I can't on the small screen, but maybe you can. There's Virginia bluebells in bloom. There's yellow wood poppy. This is our garden around our well. Now around a well, you don't want real tall plants because sometimes you have to do maintenance on wells. So this is my well garden. And in the first picture in the upper left, you can see the doll's eyes in May. And below it, you can see that same garden in the fall, in July, with the red berries and the whitewood aster and the zigzag goldenrod coming up behind it. And on the right, you can see in the spring, the whole garden there with the violets and the red doll's eyes, yellow wood poppy. And the bottom one is, it's from the other side where the white doll's eyes, the yellow wood, zigzag goldenrod and whitewood aster. This is the pond garden again in the early spring. You see the marsh marigold later on the left-hand side at the bottom. You see the blue flag iris, and green and gold. And then the phlox come on, and then later on, there is tall meadow rue and some lilies around the garden as well. This is a part sun garden that one of my friends had us put in at her house. So in the first picture, we see spiderwort, white spiderwort with yellow wood poppy just starting. And the one below that, you can see the summer phlox, red cardinal flower, and black-eyed Susan. And then there's Marilandica. I can't remember what the first name is. Yep, that's it. And below it is black-eyed Susan. This is a deep shade garden on the north side of my house. And a lot of people complain about the north side of their house because there isn't any light. So you've got to make a big bed so you get some light. So that's what I've done is most of our plantings are at least 2 feet away from the house. But the first picture, you can see the yellow wood poppy and wild geranium. Below that, the skunk cabbage, which is a great plant in a moist garden. It doesn't smell unless you get right up to it and break it. And the royal fern. The next picture you can see a little later in the summer with the royal fern and the skunk cabbage. And below that, all along the edge is our lobelia. So they come up when everything else is done. They start out just as a basil rosette and come up later on in the year when the rest of the plants are finished flowering. So I guess what I want you to take away from here is pick plants that will work in your area, group them together. I usually tell people, like in the bottom picture, to lay out the whole garden at once so you can see the spacing, you know, and make sure the spacing is correct. Make sure you have some of each plant so the colors kind of mesh together, and you have coverage of your soil. Disturb the soil as little as possible. The more you rake up weed seed, the more weeds are going to be. And as anybody knows who started a new garden, weeds are the bane. You're out there when you first plant it, making sure nothing takes over your plants. Bigger isn't always better. And I've seen native plants in huge gallon pots, and you take them out and there's no roots in the bottom because that's not what the native plants, it's not how big those roots are. That's what I'm saying. They're not, a lot of our native plants don't have real big root systems. So remember that bigger is not always better. Choose high quality plants that will grow into your site. So sometimes it's better to start out smaller and let them go where they want to intermingle with other plants. And check the ultimate width of your plants. You don't want to put a black-eyed or a black cohosh into a garden and right next to it put a bunch of small plants like Dutchman's breeches or something like that, because it's going to grow right over it. And you're out there moving plants around. And then layer your plants. Make sure you have some of each kind, that something's going to be flowering all the time. Lay out the layers and then plant. And this is the book which I based the talk on, Planting in a Post-Plant Wild World. It's really good. It's really a good book. And that's the end.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to switch to a Q&A mode. And I'm going to take this off. Screen share and stop. Okay. Can you hear us on Zoom? Somebody unmute. Jill?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to gallery, minimize. I guess you'll need to stand here to answer the question. And, oh, I'm sorry, we do need to look at the chat. Well, let's take a question from the audience. Does anyone have any questions? We have one.
I built high food and my food ground. The opportunity, like, they grow by seed? So
Yeah, they do grow from by seed, but they also will grow outward. So are they too tall or are they spreading too much?
Excuse me, Ellen, please repeat the questions.
Oh, you can't hear the microphone?
We can't hear. No, we can't. So if you
Okay.
could repeat it.
that we're getting one thing going to
Could you hear that? Can you hear that?
No,
Oh, okay. So her Joe pie weed is growing too tall. Is that or is it growing too wide as well? Both. And she wants to know if she can thin them out. So yes, you can. You can thin them out if you want. I do it early in the spring, like March, April. If you want to give them away to people, please wash the soil off the roots before you give them away to make sure you're not giving them any little travelers. If you want them just to stay shorter in June, go out there with a pair of pruning shears or hedge shears and just clip them right in half and they'll stay much shorter. Like one, yeah, yep, both. But if it's just around it, then it's probably just the roots growing out. Because usually by seed, you'll, especially with Joe pieweed and goldenrod, you'll find them someplace else because they have those little parachutes. Yeah.
Anybody else? We have one here.
I could microphone in there. Take up my- Someone who's things, how do I determine whether something is wet or dry? What is kind of the threshold in that?
So he wants to know how he determines if his soil is wet or dry. So I would say if in the spring, like in March, April, if you see standing water there, then that is going to be wet. If it's there's no standing water and water tends to drain really well, like if you went out and poured like a gallon of water and it just disappeared quite quickly, I would say that soil is at least well drained and maybe dry. If you see that you can actually do a soil test too, just to determine the fertility. But generally, if there's a lot of organic matter in it, it's going to hold a little bit more moisture, which is good. Because when it is dry, like it has been a lot these past few summers, that'll keep your plants from, desiccating. Yeah. So I guess that's the other thing is, I don't know if you are near a lake, but a lot of times near a lake, it'll be very moist in the spring and very dry in the summer. And that's why you want to use plants that'll work for that.
They're texting me the questions. The one question is how to dig and transplant natives. And I believe that the question is specifically about mayapple.
Okay. So mayapple in particular doesn't transplant very well unless you get it early. So in April, if you know where your mayapple are, you're going to go out and you're going to lift some of the duff up and you'll see a little green tip. And that's the bud of the mayapple. And you got to do this quite early, like towards the end of April. And it looks like it's very light green and it's like the width of maybe a little smaller than a nickel. But the thing about mayapple is it's a long rhizome and you don't want to cut the rhizome off and just pick the bud out because then you're done. So you're going to feel in there with your fingers and feel out which way the rhizome's going because that bud is at the end of a rhizome. And if you don't know which way it's going and you just dig in there, you might just cut the bud off. So feel in your fingers, find out where the rhizome is, and then put your trowel in on the side of the bud without the rhizome and work your way back. And again, the best time to do this is early in the spring, or well, it isn't really big in this. It's easiest to find in the spring. And then plant it right away. Don't let it dry out. Plant it right back where you want to plant it as soon as possible.
So the rhizome is like the root.
Rhizome is the root. It's a long root. Yeah, yeah.
So you want to have as much of that
As possible. Yeah, yeah.
Do they do well planting from seed? Like if you
Oh,
start them
oh, yeah,
indoors?
yeah, well, not indoors. Most of our native plants need cold to germinate. So when we harvested our apples last year in September, October, we planted them right away. And they come up, I think it's the first year, and they're little teeny tiny umbrellas. They take a long time to size up, but yeah, you can grow them from seed fairly easy. But you got to leave them out over the winter.
Another question in here? So there is one. Okay. So someone asked, what is the role of trilliums in the garden? Trilliums.
Okay, so trilliums come up and flower in the early spring. Usually around the 1st of May where I live, the trilliums are up and starting to flower. They're very beautiful. They take a long time to grow from seed, so if you purchase one, make sure that it's one that has been cultivated, not one that's been dug out of the ground. But the role I think they play is, first of all, they're food for a number of insects, flies, particularly like the red trillium. That's why the red trillium smells like rotting meat, to attract flies in to get it to pollinate. Plant them someplace where you're going to be able to see them. They do go dormant usually in August, so they come up, they flower. If they aren't going to produce seed, they go dormant usually way before that, like June into July. If they're going to seed, the seeds are usually ready at the end of July and or mid to end of July, and then in August they die back. So I guess the role is to look pretty in the garden, but also they play a role with pollinators as well. So did that answer the question? I guess.
That was the questions online. Anyone out? Any other questions?
I noticed you didn't have it.
Oh, there's somebody back here.
But you talked about. You know,
Dry in summer.
particular plants that do really well with it.
Yes, so, yeah, so she asked if there are plants that like it really wet in the spring and then will live through a dry summer. And that's exactly what shoreline plants do. So things that'll work for you like that would be swamp milkweed, liatris, wingstem, ironweed, boneset, the Joe Pies. A lot of the grasses, some of the grasses will work, some don't like it wet. Let's see, what else is, actually on our website, there's a list of shoreline plants that'll do exactly that. Green coneflower is a good one, and the bees absolutely love green coneflower. Yeah, marsh marigold, yep, but marsh marigold goes dormant later on. So they love it wet in the spring, and then towards the end of June, they're gone, but that's okay. If you're overplanted with Joe Pye weed, like my marsh marigold bed is, it works. Any other questions?
If you were looking to replace a really large amount.
So she's asking if you were establishing a prairie garden, if you can use prairie strips, and if that would, and if there's any native perennials that would sow into grasses, right? Okay, first of all, I don't know what prairie strips are. So she's thinking about planting strips, and actually that is the way to go, is to start small, but I wouldn't do it in strips. I'd do it in like 4 square foot or 10 square foot areas. Now my daughter started a prairie garden this year, and she started one like tilling and seeding, and it's come up, but there's quite a bit of weeds in it. And then she started another one, like you said, like I said, with the smaller area, and that one's much better and more able for her to keep in control. And then she's letting the seeds fall as well. And so you can do quite a large area in a small amount of time just by letting the seeds fall and letting them spread. So, yeah, no, they can't self-sow into grass, especially if you're cutting it. Yeah, you know, plus well, a few weeds will come in, but a lot of turf areas have a thatch layer, and the seeds just can't get down through. It's too dry for seeds to germinate.
was wondering, do you consider like Queen Anne's lace and daisies
Well,
import as opposed to a
yeah,
native?
they're not native. And Queen Anne's lace, so I know somebody who started a meadow, not me. And there was a lot of Queen Anne's lace around it, and Queen Anne's lace just ended up taking it all over because it just seeds everywhere. Yeah. But it is a host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. Yes.
Don't we have a lot of spring?
Sure. So I would go with a lot of those ground cover things, and I would, if you can. Oh, sorry. She wanted to know if she doesn't have a lot of flowers in her prairie or meadow garden in the spring, and she wants to know what she can add to it so that she has flowers in the spring. And so what I would do is I would add some of those ground covers. I would look at it. It's a sunny meadow. I would look at things like oh, I can't think of I know the botanical name. I'll say it, and then maybe one of you. Phlox subulata. What's phlox subulata called? Creeping phlox. That would work. You could put plugs of that in. You could use the pussy toes, which flower early. You could use alpine potentilla, which isn't actually native here, but it's native north of here, which spreads quite well and has nice yellow flowers. You could, if you have an area close to where you can see it, you can put in the blue-eyed grass. That'll spread in and amongst it, but it's quite small. Most of these are the ones who start out early in the spring. And I guess they have to be because when the prairie gets tall, you're not going to be able to see them. So they complete their things early in the spring. They complete their life cycle and produce seed early in the spring.
We have another question. We have another question from Zoom. The question is, how do you control sensitive fern from taking over?
Well, sensitive fern is fairly easy to pull out because it's got long ropey stems. So yeah, so you can just kind of almost roll it up. If that's the one you're talking about, sensitive fern is fairly easy to control. It's shallow. It's a shallow rooted plant. Are you talking about ostrich fern maybe? Ostrich fern, don't plant it. And a lot of people put it around their houses because it got quite tall and spread nicely. Yeah, but that's the thing, it spreads nicely. Yeah, but most of the other ferns are easy to pull out, and sensitive ferns, roots are really close to the soil. They're not very far down at all.
Thoughts on adding elderberry, rose hips like Rosa, Virginia, she's typing this, wisteria, are those on for this region?
I would say yes. The thing is about the Virginia rose, it does travel. So give it a big area. We made the mistake of putting it in the middle of one of my daughter's gardens, and we've got lots of little Virginia rose. So you really want to do a little research on the plants before you decide to put them in your garden. Elderberries make nice wine, and my mother used to make pies out of them. She takes forever though, because you got to get all those little seeds out. Yeah, they're a nice plant in the garden. Wisteria? Yeah, make sure you're getting American wisteria though, and not European.
I think it says American.
Yeah, wisteria.
So everything we mentioned is native.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
What's the best strategy for invasive plants?
Okay, so you want to know the best strategy for invasive plants. Don't plant them, no. So yeah, a lot of people have problems with invasives, and it really depends what it is. So the best thing to do is try and keep them pulled out, you know, as much as you can, especially when they're little. Make sure you know what you're looking at. Garlic mustard, you can keep the seed heads knocked off. Don't let the berries form on some of the other things. There are people who will come out and control your invasives for you too. But yeah, that's a hard one. I pull up multiflora rose constantly. I have a little patch of vinca that I'm at all the time. It's kind of difficult, but you just have to keep at it. And remember, when you're getting rid of these invasives, you're really making a big impact because they won't spread if you keep them in control.
I love that.
Okay, Canada anemone is a native plant. It attracts a lot of beneficial insects, but you don't want to put it in your nice little garden with all your Dutchman's breeches and small plants that are going to get run over, because it will run them over. So some native plants are aggressive. We don't call them invasive. The invasive ones are the ones that are from other places. But again, you don't want to put aggressive plants in your neat little garden. But Canada anemone does have its place, and it's a beautiful plant. The deer don't like it because it's got calcium oxalate crystals in it. So, and it flowers in June. Yeah, it'll flower in the sun too. It'll grow in the sun.
Questions from Zoom? Anyone else have questions? Oh. Here's getting.
So she's asking about the hot, dry summers that we've been having, about planting and care. So I'm going to say something that a lot of people aren't going to like or believe, but I think you should plant in the fall for starters. So you've got all the fall when it rains a lot for the roots to get established. And the roots can get established. There's not as much weed competition. And once they're established, you don't have as much problems with these plants getting through the summer. Or if you plant in the spring, now you have to water till they become established. You've got weed seeds germinating. So it's better to, I think it's better to plant in the fall, but I want you to plant in the spring anyway. But as long as you're willing to water and we have steady rains like we did last spring, you're good. But once you get those hot, dry months, and were you talking about an established garden trying to keep it watered? Okay, an established garden, I wouldn't worry too much about watering. Some of the plants may look like they're going dormant, and they might be, but a lot of times they'll come back. Just depends what it is. For example, ferns sometimes die back, but then they're back the next year. It really depends what they are. But if they're established, usually they'll make it through the hot, dry areas, that hot, dry times. You can put a little mulch down to try and keep the soil moisture in, and put the ground covers down to hold that soil moisture. And it really does make a difference when there's something right against the ground like that, keeping the soil moisture in. It shades it so you don't lose as much evaporation through the soil. Yeah.
Questions from Zoom. What are some of the more aggressive natives?
So we talked about, she wants to know, oh, yeah. She wants to know what the more aggressive natives are. So we already talked about the Canada anemone, which will go on and on and on forever if it's nice soil. There's also Canada goldenrod. I recommend never putting that in your garden because it is one that goes on and on and on forever as well. Yeah, jewelweed, you've got one, you've got a whole garden full of them. What we talked about, the Virginia rose, that one spreads by rhizomes or stolons and goes on and on. Yeah, common milkweed, again, spreads by those long ropey roots and goes on and on and on forever. Sumac, not fragrant, the other one. Staghorn sumac will spread like crazy. So there's a lot of them that'll spread like crazy. Just depends what it is and where it is. If you planted a Canada anemone in a drier location, like around a mailbox, it'll pretty much stay where you put it. It's just as soon as it gets into a nice soil with a lot of organic matter, it goes on and on and on.
Anyone else here?
You need to choose a number between 1 and 12.
Between them.
7.
And I want to just add for some people, if you get into an area where you have a lot of that Canada goldenrod, we just kept it mowed and all the native grasses just came up.
Yeah, because they weren't shaded anymore. Yeah, good
But
idea.
you have to keep that Canadian goldenrod. If you keep it mowed, you'll end up with like a wild lawn.
Talking about mowing the Canada goldenrod
Right.
is what she was talking about.
Do that early in the spring though.
Right?
Aren't we done here? So I say thank you. Thanks so much for coming.
We had one more question, Carol, just came in.
What?
One more question just came in.
Another question. Oh,
I'm looking for natives that can outcompete invasive swallowwort for dry sunny.
outcompete in spaces.
Swallowwort.
That's when you might want to use your Canada golden and your Virginia rose and common milkweed, things that are aggressive. It would be the way to go. And I would keep your swallowwort cut back if you can't pull it out.